Welcome back, everybody. It is week 4. This is the Real Psych Media, chapter number 4 of Psychology for Dummies. We're going to be doing another video next week, and then we're going to be starting a different course, so stay tuned for that. So, let's get started. In this chapter, we're going to be learning about conscious beings. Specifically, that is the chapter title, Conscious Beings. In this chapter, we are going to bring light to the consciousness and unconsciousness. We are going to be talking about breaking through to the other side using some things such as psychedelics, and then also going to bed, getting sleep such as REM sleep, deep sleep, and those different types of things. So let's get into it. So chapter 4, Conscious Beings. The first section is conscious beings, which we speak about consciousness, which consciousness is our current state of awareness of the external and internal stimulus that is going on. So that has to do with the environment, internal dialogue, everything like that. So being conscious is like having a light on. So if you were to turn the light on, imagine that you being conscious, awake, and aware. This is what happens in the brain. Imagine light off for unconsciousness, okay? So consciousness allows us to monitor ourselves and our environment while giving us a greater control over our actions and behaviors. So that's very important. Our consciousness is highly important. It's due to the environment as well as the actions and behaviors that happen within those environments to create a greater control within our consciousness. So how do we measure something like that? We measure it based on stuff such as stimulus or stimuli, which is anything in our world, an event, situation, or even an object that triggers a psychological response, okay? So keep in mind that our consciousness has its limits. It does, for sure, but there's been a lot of people that have tapped into various mediums of consciousness. The amount of material in our awareness, along with the content of that material, defines the level of consciousness that we find in and at any moment within ourselves. So this is a good section, talks about consciousness, our current state of awareness, and external and internal stimulus. So now we're going to go into the next section. Alright, so this next section is exploring the horizons of our awareness. So consciousness exists in your inner voice, okay? The awareness within yourself and surroundings, as well as the experiences and environments. You are typically not aware of numerous mental processes, such as bodily sensations and things going on in our mind. So there's various things that are happening in the body that we don't consciously think about. That is what it's essentially saying. So an example could be, you don't hear your heartbeat as you walk down the street, but you can hear it when you focus on hearing it, bringing your awareness into understanding this. So a different state opposite of consciousness is something called coma, which is a state of extreme unawareness or lack of consciousness. So it's the opposite. So when in a coma, an individual feels disconnected from the world, but at times can be aware of the mind and the body, okay? So this next part of consciousness, it can be broken down into 3 specific ways. The subjective experience of your own personal awareness, others' observations of the deliberate actions, and electrical measurements of the brain's electrical activity. So let's look at the subject's experience of your own awareness. So lucid dreaming, which is being aware that you are dreaming, is due to being aware that you were asleep. So full awareness, whether you are awake or asleep, is what it is. So imagine, like, if you want to try to lucid dream, before you go to bed, just work it on your breath, do some breath work, and then tell yourself you're aware, you're going to sleep, you're aware, you're going to sleep, and more than likely, you'll probably tap into REM sleep pretty easily. So the second way of consciousness, it's others' observations of deliberate action, which is the most important part of consciousness, knowing that it mediates our behavior, okay? We at times act impulsively or reflexively, and we don't think about what we're doing, we just do it. So those are reactionary states, that things that trigger us. And we attribute consciousness to the act of deliberation and intention. So deliberately doing something with intention, those two coincide together. You have to be intentional and you have to be deliberate, and that is how we attribute consciousness. So a willful act could be seen as a signal of conscious awareness, okay? So the third and final consciousness is electrical measurements of the brain, electrical activity. This is due to the brain's activity. We can observe consciousness physiologically and behaviorally. So physiologically, the body within the body, and behaviorally, how people act. We can measure this by EEGs, which is electro-enhanced phaleograph, which is a scientific machine that measures the brain waves or electrophysiological activity within the brain. So these are EEGs. We're going to be speaking about those later in this chapter, specifically in sleep. These are measurements of electrical activity in the brain that correspond to different levels of observable consciousness. Okay, so now let's go to the next section. So this next section, altering your consciousness, we're going to be looking at the different altering levels of awareness, which is, we see this through ideals such as meditation, religious rituals, sleep deprivation, and altered states of everyday awareness. There are over 20 levels of consciousness, but we're going to be diving into 9. One of them having 4 sub states, which we're going to dive into the first one. The first notable conscious state is rapture, which is an intense feeling of overpowering emotion, experienced as pleasure and positive. Okay, it's a positive, pleasurable sensation state, which is seen after sex, ritualistic dancing, religious rituals, and even psychoactive substances. The second most notable consciousness state is meditative states. These are minimal mental activity that includes reduction in mental imagery, specifically pictures in your head. You have less mental activity going on in the brain during this meditative state. Examples could be such as meditation, yoga, or even prayer at times. The third most notable consciousness state is the trance state, okay? It's an alert, but very suggestible state. So you're very suggestible, very alert. Things can trigger you left and right. An individual in a trance may focus on a single stimulus and be completely oblivious to their environment around them. So they're dialed in, focused, triggered onto one specific and targeted onto one specific thing or thought. The fourth most notable consciousness state is daydreaming. This is rapid thinking unrelated to an individual's current environment. So rapid thinking, daydreaming, I think we've all been there, where we think about something else while sitting either at the office or at work or working on something or whatnot. This could be a result of boredom, sensory deprivation, or even sleep deprivation. So the fifth most notable consciousness state is expanding consciousness, which we can increase awareness, not typically of everyday experiences and awareness, by using drugs and sensory deprivation. So ideals such as psychedelic, mushrooms, LSD, PCP, stuff like that. So there are 4 levels of expanded consciousness. These are sublevels, which are part of the most notable consciousness states. So sensory, which is an altered experience of space, time, and other sensory phenomena. So sensory is an altered experience of your space and time. And then recollective and analytic is an idea that an experience in which individuals develop novel ideas and revelations about themselves in the world and in their role within the world. Okay, so being able to have a vision and see specific things of their role within a specific environment or in the world. And then thirdly is symbolic, which is the identification with a historical figure of famous person accompanied by mystical symbols, such as having a vision or of a crucifix or even an angel. So symbolic things, visions, different things like that. It's a different level of consciousness. And then lastly, integral, which is a religious and or mystical experience, usually involving God or some other supernatural being or force within the universe. An example of this is the person feels merged at or one with the world or universe. So this is an idea of cosmic consciousness, being one with the whole world, with the universe and everything in it. And only few can actually reach this level of consciousness. But it is very doable. It does take time, especially with the type of environment and society that we live in today. So now we're going to be diving into the next section. All right, so this next section is getting high on conscious life, okay? So the most common method for altering consciousness, I think we all know, is drugs, okay? So a cool fact, within ancient Egyptians, they used cocaine and other drugs to tap into insights of ideas of the consciousness itself. So the idea of consciousness being one with self. They've found ancient Egyptian tombs that have cocaine tucked away or in that specific tomb, wrapped up in the mummification process. So we see that the states of being high actually represents a change within your consciousness. So getting high alters your consciousness. Going from a level of awareness that includes or induces negative feelings to a different level of awareness where the individual no longer feels bad. So using specific dopamine and serotonin hits or drugs to spike it so that you go from feeling bad to feeling good. Many mind and mood altering drugs create an escape from one state of consciousness to another. So that's why sometimes it can be very addictive using certain drugs, because they are very altering and they can give you that escape type of feeling. So keep in mind, not all drugs necessarily have an impact on our consciousness. So things such as aspirin or antibiotics, I think that those aren't significant transitions into the consciousness. Those are lower stimuli. And then we see that a higher stimulus is the psychoactive drugs, which are drugs whose main effect is to alteration of the consciousness. That's the main effect. So these are LSD, PCP, marijuana, cocaine, acetaminophen, ecstasy, and alcohol. So negative effects of psychoactive substances, there are quite a bit, if not used properly. Addiction, brain damage, mental illnesses, psychoactive distress, and social and legal problems. They say social and legal problems because people tend to not be able to afford specific drugs, but end up needing them again and again because of the type of stimulus that they've got. They are no longer able to operate at that level because they don't feel a dopamine hit as they did before normally. All right, so this next section is called Your Eyes Are Getting Very Heavy. We talked about just getting high, so I think that's why they labeled this section that. So we're going to be talking about hypnosis, which is very interesting. I want to learn more and more about it. This doesn't speak a lot about how to actually use hypnosis, but we will discover those in other courses. So hypnosis is a procedure in which a person called a hypnotist suggests changes in sensations, feelings, thoughts, or behaviors to the subject. So some psychologists suggest that hypnosis is an increase in suggestibility, being able to be suggestible in a suggestible state that allows the hypnosis to control the subject's behavior, suggesting a specific behavior. So others believe that it actually is an altered state of consciousness in which a person disassociates or separates from the normal or regular state of consciousness, which I think both of these actually are a part of hypnosis. It depends on how you do specifically need to use hypnosis or how deep you need to go. So the key mechanism of hypnosis itself is suggestion, being able to be suggestible, which suggestion is a directive given to the subject to act, feel, or think in a particular way. So a hypnotic induction is where a hypnosis begins the process with some pleasant suggestions at first and progresses into a more sophisticated request or hypnosis trance. So hypnosis tends to be used in entertainment, comedy stars, stuff like that. Smoking, like to get people to stop smoking, or any other specific habits that they may have or may kill them. And recovery, and also repressing memories. So repressed memories of the past, you can be found, or they can be found specifically through using hypnosis and being able to go back into the mind or into that other level of consciousness. That's why other psychologists believe that as well. Alright, so this next section is called Catching Some Z's. We're going to be talking about sleep, which sleep represents a change in consciousness. So being asleep, you're unconscious, so that is changing from conscious state to an unconscious state. Sleep is calculated by electrophysiological activity through the brain wave activity. So an awake and alert, that is a beta stage, which is beta activity. It's a frequency of 13 to 30 hertz. And an awake but relaxed state is the alpha activity, which is a frequency lower, which is 8 to 12 hertz. And then the 4 stages of sleep we're going to be talking about. Stage 1 is closing eyes and relaxing, which is the sleep mode. Everybody it's when you get in bed, you get ready for bed, sleep mode. This is where we see alpha to theta activity occurring, so a 3.5 to 7.5 hertz. That's where brain waves become less regular. So this lasts around 10 minutes. It's the first stage of sleep, so it's putting yourself into sleep, out of consciousness into unconsciousness. So higher amplitude waves is equal to smaller hertz measurements, because hertz is a measure of frequency. So amplitude is a measure of wave height. Okay? So an example is if a wave is really high. Okay? If a wave is really high, it takes longer to get somewhere and has lower frequency. So the second stage we're going to be looking at is irregular or contains spikes of very low amplitude EEG waves called K complexes. We also see this idea of spindles, which are short bursts of 12 to 14 hertz or waves. So soundly asleep at this stage, we are soundly asleep at this stage and may think that we are actually not sleeping. So it's stage 2, we're going deeper into sleep. Some of us may not think that we are sleeping. So an example of this could be someone saying, like sleeping on the couch and saying, "Oh, I was just resting my eyes, you know. I wasn't sleeping." Even if you heard them snoring, they may not even be aware that they were sleeping. So the third stage, we emit high amplitude waves, about 3.5 hertz, which are an EEG signal of delta activity. Okay, so we spend about an hour here, an hour and a half in this stage, and then we are going to see, we're going to be going into deep and REM sleep. So stage 4, this stage is signaled by the presence of more waves interruptions. So different things, wave interruptions, so those smooth delta waves, we're going to see a ton of spikage happen and reoccur. So this is known as rapid eye movement, which is REM sleep. This is when our eyes move back and forth very rapidly. Okay, so REM is characterized by the presence of beta activity. This is a substage where the brain is active, but we are asleep. So we can see this idea of lucid dreaming. This is a dream stage that happens within like 1 to 1.5 hours into sleep. And these stages actually circulate throughout the night, but you can increase your REM sleep if you do focus on breathing, like I said before, and going into that conscious state of going to sleep before going to sleep. So we sleep so that our body can restore, and that's the things that are lost and damaged during the walking hours of the day. This is our restorative stage. If you're able to get in a REM sleep or deep sleep, these are things that will actually increase your productivity throughout the day. So now we're going to be going into dreams, naked dreams. So this last section is called Arriving at Work Naked. It's talking about dreams. This was the section that talked about imagining yourself going to work naked and then waking up realizing, oh, thank God it was a dream. So we saw that Sigmund Freud is actually credited with saying that dreams are the royal road to our unconsciousness. So following Freud, many believed that dreams are symbolic or prophetic and represent another altered state of consciousness. So these dreams represent something. Even back when Sigmund Freud was around, we saw that they were wondering like what the significance of these dreams were. So dreams are a byproduct of the brain reorganizing and storing the information gathered over the course of the waking day. So everything that had occurred were in the restorative stage of sleep. So Freud and others, like psychoanalysts, make the point that dreams have deeper meaning than their surface context suggested. So they dove deeper into this. This is where we see symbolism of dreams in the real world coming into play, like being able to see a car and say, oh, well, I dreamt about that last night. That's so strange. Well, it's because there's something going on within the universe, the consciousness, and being able to be aware within the dream state. So psychoanalysts believe that the context of and processes of our dreams represent deep, unconscious conflicts, desires, and issues within the real world. So the interpretation of dreams then actually starts to come into place, being able to interpret dreams. Dreams often represent our attempts to fulfill wishes that we are not consciously aware of. So psychoanalysts help patients find the meaning of their own dream. Thank you guys again for coming back to the Real Psych Media channel. We appreciate you. So this week we learned about bringing light to the consciousness, sleep, our awareness, behavior. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next week for Chapter 5. Thank you guys.